Folks, tonight we're going to try to get through the military exploits of Muhammad, but I don't know that we'll get through them entirely, simply because I do want to throw in some thought-provoking questions and axioms again that relate to the fact that we have here a manifestation of God who is actively participating in a military campaign or series of campaigns. And even though they are defensive, he does participate in the battle. So we come up with then, what is justice? The question of justice. So let us begin with my sharing the PowerPoint I've created, and we'll see how far we get. I've designated about almost 200 or more slides for our continuation of Islam. It may seem we're spending an awful lot of time on this religion, but as I remind you, we are exhorted to study Islam by the Guardian. And we are also, it is important that we understand how our religion springs out of what Muhammad brought or intended to bring. And how much of, as I've already noted in the past, how much of his own writing alludes to particular passages from the Quran, sayings and writings of the Imams, and hadiths that are authenticated by both Shia and Sunni. So with that, we'll begin class 15, an overview of Islam from a Baha'i perspective, the life of Muhammad, part 3. So we discussed at the end of last class about Muhammad realizing the first intimation of his revelation, his sharing that with Khadijah, her comforting him, and then this slide here about Ali, seeing them in prayer and immediately accepting the faith, and Muhammad as its prophet. Muhammad's public declaration of his religion, of his revelation, did not occur until 3 years later. After 3 years, Muhammad was commanded to preach in public. Now, was commanded, what does that mean? Well, it's stated this way because he delivers almost all of the surah, not all of them, but most of them, a good many of them, as if the angel Gabriel is commanding him what to say. Whereas in some surah, he speaks directly to his followers and tells them, for example, I am but a man like you, and yet I am an apostle of God, and I am the seal of the prophet. So sometimes it's conversation. So he is commanded to preach in public and withdraw from the idolaters. Now, the idolaters, if you remember, the Kaaba is the center of idol worshiping, and one particular idol we'll mention later. The Quran reads, profess publicly then what thou hast been bidden, and withdraw from those who join gods to God, idol worshippers. He invited his kinsmen, the leaders of Mecca, had a sheep cooked with milk, and after they had eaten, he freely told them what had happened, that he had become a prophet, ending, never before has an Arab bestowed on his people what I now bring to you. Who will act as my brother and helper? There was an icy silence. Abu Lahab, one of the uncles, shrugged his shoulders. Then young Ali cried out, I will help you, prophet of God. And they all laughed, and the meeting broke up. Now, I read that last week, and so we're picking up at the point then where he begins openly to teach. At the age of 43, he preached, and the Meccans scoffed. They asked him, and this is going to get worse and worse. They asked him to perform miracles, scoffing at him, obviously. The same way, if you remember, and I'm going to start alluding more and more to the Baha'i writings, even though some of you may not be Baha'is, you'll understand later what I'm talking about. If you remember in Baghdad, that the clerics challenged Baha'u'llah to perform a miracle, and he said, I'll perform a miracle if y'all can get together And I'm sure he didn't say y'all, that's from me, that if you can assemble and agree on a miracle, I'll perform it on the condition that if I do, you will become followers. And they couldn't agree, and they decided they better not tempt him. uh, and so they challenged him with things like, can your God disclose which articles will rise in price? In other words, sort of insider trading kind of comment here. Muhammad would answer, I am only a man like you. It is revealed to me that your God is one God. Then they replied, go straight to him, implore his pardon, and woe to those who join gods with God. Uh, I mixed that up, but you can read it on your own. Again, I remind you that many of these slides I'm going to skip over because I am sending, of course, the slides on the URL for the recorded meeting for you to look at on your own. And I would like you to do that so you will keep up with where we are and have questions related to it. The Quran tells us, but most of them withdraw and hearken not. And they say, our hearts are under shelter from thy teachings, and in our ears is a deafness. Between us and thee, there is a veil. And then another passage from the Quran. They spoke much as do materialists of our own day. The Quran states, for example, and they say there is only our present life, we die and we live, and naught but time destroyeth us. Muhammad then warned them, the likeness for those who take to themselves patrons other than God is the likeness of the spider who buildeth her house, but verily the frailest of all surely is the house of the spider. Besides insisting that there was only one God and telling them to follow righteousness as they would be called to account in the next world, Muhammad spoke to them repeatedly about the coming of the hour. He sometimes called it meeting with God. He sometimes called it the quickening. He sometimes called it the day of days, sometimes the last judgment. But he's talking about the coming of the Bab, of course, of this day now. And this is why he calls himself both a prophet and a warner. This is one of his most important functions. He's warning them not only individually about the need for them to save themselves spiritually, but also of what is coming in the course of time. They have treated the coming of the hour as a lie, but a flaming fire have we got ready for those who treat the coming of the hour as a lie. Sometimes he called it the inevitable. The chapter of this name in the Quran begins, when the day that must come shall have come suddenly, none shall treat that sudden coming as a lie. Day that shall abase, day that shall exalt. It was the great day of God he was warning them about, the advent of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, this day we're living in right now. To understand the Quran, it is thus essential to study the book of certitude, as I've mentioned before. In the surah of the daybreak, he told them, and thy Lord shall come, and the angels rank by rank. The Meccans did not know what to make of him. For a time they mocked him. And here comes the son of Abdullah with his news from heaven. Then as he continued to warn them and to denounce their gods, and he made some converts, they tried to bribe him. If thou wishest to acquire riches, we will collect a fortune larger than is possessed by any of us. If thou desirest honors, we shall make thee our chief. He answered, do you indeed disbelieve in him? Do you assign him peers? The Lord of the worlds is he. Baha'u'llah's observation is thus important about Muhammad's suffering. And you read this throughout the writings. Periodically, Baha'u'llah referred to the fact that Muhammad says, no prophet has suffered as I have. And then, of course, Baha'u'llah says the same thing about himself, and both are true. The Quraysh stopped him from praying in the Kaaba. They pursued him, covered him and his disciples with filth when they were praying, incited children and rabble to follow and mock them. On one occasion, a woman spread thorns where he would walk. Baha'u'llah thus observes in the Book of Certitude, how abundant the thorns and briars which they have strewn in his path. Such sore accusations they brought against him, that in recounting them, God forbid the ink to flow or the page to bear them. For this reason did Muhammad cry out, no prophet of God hath suffered such harm as I have suffered. They appealed to his uncle and protector, the head of his clan. Remember, you have the clan, the tribe, and then the whole city. And he is a member of the Hashim clan and of the Quraysh tribe. And this uncle begged him to desist from teaching, as he was bringing ruin on himself and his family, but Muhammad was fearless in his constancy in proclaiming the word of God. And if you remember last time I said, in the Book of Certitude, this is one of the 5 proofs that Baha'u'llah gives of the manifestation. So as the persecution increased for the next 8 years, the number of his followers also increased, but also the opposition increased. And this troubled, of course, the tribe, because the Quraysh tribe was in charge of the Kaaba, and that's how they made their money, was the idol worshippers coming to pay tribute to their gods on an annual basis, and you know, sort of like an annual fair or something, and they made most of their income that way. And so he was not only threatening their beliefs or lack of belief, but he was also threatening their income. Their concerns stem from the fact that Muhammad was preaching the belief in a single God and also explicitly condemning some of the practices common to tribal traditions. Some of those we'll mention later. In time, his life became imperiled. At that point, Muhammad instructed his followers to leave Mecca and proceed to Medina, which, as I showed you on the map, is about exactly 200 miles due north of Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula, so that they would be safe. Then in 622, the tribal leaders in Mecca became aware of this immigration, that is the followers of Muhammad leaving Mecca to go to Medina, and they decided that Muhammad must die. And so they plotted to kill him, and hence the Hijira, or the immigration, and its importance. This is the year that the Islamic calendar begins, because it's such an important date. It's similar, if you will, in a way to the exiles of Baha'u'llah, though Baha'u'llah did not decide where he would go exactly. He did, in the sense that when he was in the Siyah in Tehran, he was released. And of course, if you remember, the Russian ambassador, or the Russian representative in Tehran, said that he could go to Russia and be safe. But he decided he wanted to be as close to his followers as he could. And so he himself chose Baghdad as a place to immigrate, or to be exiled. From Baghdad to Constantinople, and then from Constantinople to Adrianople, and finally he was exiled from Adrianople to Akka. Messed that up a little, and where he was expected to die and the religion to die out. The family, the clan, and the tribe. The point I'm trying to make here is, why is it that almost inevitably those who are the closest physically and know best the life of the prophet are those who are most vehement detractors? For those who have known the prophet all his life as an ordinary relative or citizen, a clan or tribal member, it is challenging, a test and a judgment upon those around him, to accept what seems to be a sudden claim that he is an emissary from God, a God they don't believe in, and one who possesses an exalted station and power, that the prophet is, who should be followed and obeyed. This is especially true when he is teaching that their own traditional beliefs, norms, and way of life is immoral or should be abandoned in favor of a new system of belief and an entirely new pattern of daily life. And I often use this analogy when I'm talking about this, especially to non-Baha'is, that imagine if your brother or sister or a cousin suddenly claimed to have some lofty position, spiritual position, and you were to follow them. It would be a real test, a real challenge. And we'll deal with that as we approach the Baha'i faith, because this happened not only with the Bab and Baha'u'llah, but also Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. So at this juncture, the Meccans united to murder Muhammad. They arranged for members of all clans to attack him at once so that the blood guilt would not rest on any of them. Now, blood guilt is a traditional tribal thing, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it says in the Bible. And that is a tribal law because the Hebrew children, as they are called in the Bible sometimes, were a tribal community. And that is tribal law in any culture. All cultures seem to go through a tribal level of organization. And it is extremely common that the tribal law, in order to maintain order and justice and peace, that blood guilt is a penalty you must pay. If you injure another or a member of another family, you have to either pay a certain amount of money or else you will lose a member of your body. And so in my study of the Anglo-Saxon tribal community, for example, it's interesting. I've translated their laws, and some of their laws would tell you how many fingers you would lose if you struck up, took out someone's eye or so on. It's quite interesting how they would figure out what a part of the body was worth in money or in your own body. So that's what blood guilt is about. And so this way, not one particular tribe or one particular clan is not responsible. So they all collude together, wait outside his house, but at daybreak, they discover that Muhammad had already gone to Medina and that the person lying in his bed was Ali, his cousin and his earliest follower other than Khadijah. And so Muhammad goes on the Hijira, the immigration, to Medina, where he is welcomed triumphantly. He enters Medina. A sheikh put his turban on the end of a lance for a banner, and a parasol of palm branches was held over the prophet's head, while the helpers, called the Ansar, the Medina believers, surrounded him, brandishing swords and spears. He dismounted on the outskirts and turned towards the point of adoration, which at that point was Jerusalem. He would later change the Qibla to Mecca. He prayed with all the multitude. Then the accounts say he let his camel go free in the town, and where it knelt, a mosque was later erected. As he entered, he greeted all the people, even the children. And so here we begin a series of wars where the people from Mecca attack Medina, and we're going to look at three particular battles of importance. So the Meccans were the Meccans were cheated of their prey. The despised outcast, the one they had called a crazed poet, a madman, a liar, was now the head of a state. And now all Arabia arose against Medina. The Meccans rallied the tribes, including a fifth column. Now, a fifth column, I presume you know what that means, but if you don't, it's a group of people united in a community when people are at war, who are, in the guise of comrades, but who are actually spies, if you will. And in this case, it was primarily a Jewish tribe and clan in Medina that were plotting with the Meccans against Muhammad. That we'll see later. The battle was on between idolatry and true worship, between Hubal, and Hubal is the one I mentioned earlier, was the primary god or idol worshipped at the Kaaba. And I put a note down here for you, but it was interesting because they would go to Hubal and ask a question, and then they would throw some arrows in front of the statue, and the arrows would point to the right answer. It would have a series of answers, sort of like a Ouija board, I guess. So the Islamic calendar, as I said, begins 622 with the Hijira. And there are 3 battles, as I said, that we're going to look at. And you can see that these are there are other battles that Muhammad fought in and that were waged, but the most important between Medina and Mecca that results in the ultimate victory, where Muhammad in a 4th battle takes back Mecca, and that's when Mecca becomes the Qibla. The most critical are at Badr in 623, Mount Uhud in 625, and the siege on Medina called the Battle of the Trench in 627. So the first one in 623, and then 2 years later in Uhud, and then 2 years after that in Medina. So we're going to look at those kind of quickly. I've got more information for you on these slides than we're going to necessarily have to go over tonight to give you information. And of course, there's lots of information online at your fingertips if you want to get into all the details of the battles, more than's really necessary for our purposes. Our purposes is to understand why the manifestation of God must fight, how do we justify that when we think of the previous manifestation of Christ as an emissary of peace, as a gentle individual, and so on. Of course, I read to you about 3 or 4 classes ago a statement that where Abdul Baha says, if Christ had been in the same situation that Muhammad was in, he would have done the same thing. And we'll see that quote later, not this class, but next class. Muhammad established the Ummah, and the Ummah is a community based on constitutional governance. This is something that he doubtless would have brought to the entire Islamic world had the religion been carried out as he meant it to be. Now, I had one of the class members, James Williams again, who's always asking great questions. Is it possible that the prophet meant for this schism to happen? And the answer is no. The fact is that we really have a chance. Obviously, we're meant to learn from our mistakes, we being the human race. And so this is why studying his history is so important. So what was the Constitution of Medina? Well, basically, it's the same as the pact that Abdul Baha talks about in the Secret of Divine Civilization, and you'll see what I'm talking about. All the tribes, the diverse tribes, agree, among other things, not to shed the blood of other tribes, to secure freedom of religious worship, to make Medina a haram, a sacred place, to form a political alliance, effectively a city-state, in which each tribe would be responsible for upholding order within its purview in its own particular part of the city. And all the tribes collectively would be assured of protection and would attack anyone who arose against another tribe. And so here is the pact described by Abdul Baha, which is very similar. The fundamental principle underlying this solemn pact. Now he's talking here about the pact that will be formed in the future that will establish the lesser peace. It should be fixed so that if any government later violate any one of its provisions, all the governments on earth should arise to reduce it to utter submission. Nay, the human race as a whole should resolve with every power at its disposal to destroy that government. Should this greatest of all remedies be applied to the sick body of the world, it will assuredly recover from its ills and will remain eternally safe and secure. So this is the concept of collective justice that Abdul Baha discusses. I think this was in 1875 when he wrote The Secret of Divine Civilization. And of course, it's discussed by Baha'u'llah. He introduces the concept to the world leaders in his letters. First of all, this I've showed you before is a model of the mosque in Medina that Muhammad had built. And this is how it looks today. And you can see there's a 4-lane highway right outside it and so on, but it's a beautiful edifice on its own. So let's go to the major battles. And I bring up this question on this. I added this just about a half hour ago because I thought it's very relevant. And that is when we're trying to consider what is justice, particularly when we're talking about a manifestation getting involved in fighting and so on, we say, well, is that just? You know, is that appropriate? Baha'u'llah forbids the bearing arms or hitting someone. And yet, Baha'u'llah also has, as one of the 4 laws for which he designates a penalty, the crime of murder. One of the alternatives, and of course, the House of Justice will judge each case on its own merits, but one of the alternative punishments in a Baha'i state, in a society that has become a Baha'i state, is a capital punishment. And of course, the reason we don't like it much today is that it's used inconsistently. It takes years for it to be carried out. And for all we know, we may be executing the wrong person. And Baha'u'llah takes care of that. He says, if someone is executed and it's a mistake, they will be, special care will be taken of them for the sacrifice they have made in order to establish a just government and an orderly civilization. We'll deal with that a lot later, but I think it's important for us to bring this up now so that when we are pondering the life of Muhammad, we look at it in this context of what is justice after all. And this is the second of the hidden words, the second Arabic hidden word. O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily justice is my gift to thee, the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. It's still kind of vague what he means here because it sounds like independent investigation of the truth is what he's getting at. I spent a third of the book I wrote that's available if you want to buy it, and it's also on my website if you want to see a discussion of it, discussing a Baha'i definition of what justice means. And put in one sentence, I come to the conclusion that justice in its most broad sense means that which is appropriate. And a propriety in any situation. But we'll deal with that more later. We're used to thinking of justice as the contrary to mercy when judging someone. So the first battle, the Battle of Badr in 623, who supported Muhammad in these battles? Well, you have the Muhajirin, uh, the first converts to Islam who were from Mecca and followed him to Medina. The Ansar, who the helpers, who were the citizens of Medina that housed the people from Mecca when they first came, and then fought with him in these battles. And then you have two tribes, the largest tribe in Medina, the Aus, and then the Khazraj, the descendants of the Aus tribe, known as Banu Kaila. Now, you don't need to remember all that, obviously, but it is useful if you go back to this slide when you're looking at the battle maps that I provided for you. Now, the battle of at Badr, you can see Badr is right here. Medina is here. 200 south is miles south is Mecca. And so the battles are fought to defend Medina against the attacking individuals from Mecca. And so you see these are in defense. And it brought to mind today another quote that we'll get to later, where I compare Muhammad's participation in this to the fact that Baha'u'llah, when the famous battle at Fort Sheikh Tabarsi took place, went to that site to examine the fort to see if it was in good shape, good standing, and so on. He approved of it. And then later, when he was coming back to join the defenders there, he was arrested, taken to the town of Amul, and bastinadoed until his feet bled, and he was imprisoned. That was his first imprisonment. So you get my point. I'm sure that Baha'u'llah would have been a participant in that battle had he not been prevented from doing so. Now, you may say, well, he foreknew that this would happen and that he wouldn't have to. Not the point. The point is that he is, by doing that, indicating that it would not have been an inappropriate thing for him to do. The statistics here, I'm not going to read them out. They're available for you, but you can see that the totals of forces that Muhammad had in this first battle, very small, only about 300. The totals for the opposing force from Mecca, 3 times that many. And you can see same with 2 horses and 70 camels, as opposed to 100 horses and 170 camels. And then you see the killed here. You can see very few of Muhammad's forces were killed, whereas 70 killed by of the Meccans and their comrades, and 70 prisoners. And that's important because of this quote here, this treatment of the prisoners. In pursuance of Muhammad's commands, the citizens of Medina and such of the refugees as possessed houses received the prisoners and treated them with such much consideration. Blessings be on the men of Medina, said one of these prisoners in latter days. They made us ride while they themselves walked. They gave us wheaten bread to eat while there was little of it, contenting themselves with dates. It is not surprising that when some time afterwards their friends came to ransom them, several of the prisoners who had been thus received declared themselves adherents of Islam. Their kindly treatment was thus prolonged and left a favorable impression on the minds even of those who did not at once go over to and become Muslims. The second battle, the Battle of Uhud. Mount Uhud, you're going to see in a map in just a second, is strategically important because Muhammad had a rather ingenious plan, as you would expect a manifestation to have, to defeat the enemy, even though once again they are far outnumbered. For the Muslims, the battle held a religious dimension as well as a military one. They had expected another victory like that at Badr, which was considered a sign of God's favor upon them. At Uhud, however, They barely held off the invaders, had lost a great many men. A verse of the Quran revealed soon after the battle cited the Muslims' disobedience and desire for loot or booty as the cause of this setback. Here again is a tribal tradition, or a tradition in tribal warfare. Part of the reason you go to war is to get riches. And so a lot of times, particularly, I know, again, my familiarity is mostly with Scandinavian tribes and the Germanic tribes. They would go to battle specifically to get the spoils of battle. And so it was expected that they would. This is not what Muhammad had in mind. Unfortunately, at the Battle of Uhud, as they started winning, they started going for the booty rather than staying in place and finishing the battle out. Likewise, Muhammad had devised a strategy whereby they would have 50 archers on top of this hill who would be hidden, and when the forces of the enemy passed by, then they would fire upon them. And I think they left their posts and so on. And so here is the battle map. And you can go over this, but the red represents the forces from Mecca. You can see the Prophet has his camp securely in this little valley here under Mount Uhud, and you can see Mount Uhud. There are pictures of that site today, as it is today, and you see the archers were here on this hilltop, and you can see that the infantry here of Musab bin Umar deserts, or they again go looking for the booty, and they leave. So they win, but this is a painting that's done of it. I think it's a beautiful piece of art, but it's also, you see, some are on horseback, some are on camels. Their weapons are mostly swords, spears, and bows and arrows. Allah, and this is from the Quran, Surah 3, verse 152. Allah did indeed fulfill his promise to you when ye, with his permission, were about to annihilate your enemy, until ye flinched and fell to disputing about the order and disobeyed it after he brought you in sight of the booty which you covet. Among you are some that hanker after this world, and some that desire the hereafter. Then did he divert you from your foes in order to test you, but he forgave you, for Allah is full of grace to those who believe. So he forgave them in the sense that they won, but they paid a heavy price for their disobedience. Here are the losses. You can see that here the forces, here a lot more forces. You can see originally they had 1,000 men, but then you had the withdrawal of that infantry. And then you have, so you've got really 700 men against 3,000 men, 3,000 camels and 200 cavalry. And so they only lost 35, whereas you have 75 killed here. And you wonder, well, why weren't more killed? And the reason is because once the battle it's clear who the winner is, they withdraw. The most famous battle, and this is the one we'll end with tonight, is the Battle of the Trench, a 27-day-long defense by Muslims of Medina from the Arab and Jewish tribes. Now, the Jewish tribes team up with the Quraysh to war against Muhammad. The strength of the Confederate armies is estimated around 10,000 men, with 600 horses and some camels, while the Medinan defenders numbered 3,000. So again, 3-1. The siege was a battle of wits in which the Muslims tactically overcame their opponents while suffering very few casualties. Efforts to defeat the Muslims failed and Islam became influential in the region. As a consequence, the Muslim army besieged the area of Banu Qurayza, I don't know how to pronounce that, leading to their surrender. The defeat caused the Meccans to lose their trade and much of their prestige. Now this is 627, and here is the map of that battle, and it's called the Battle of the Trench because at the suggestion of a Persian confederate of Muhammad, they decided to build a trench here and another trench here so that they would be sealed off against the attack. You can see here's Quraysh encampment here. Here's another enemy encampment here. Here is the mountain of Uhud. And here is Medina. So Medina is encircled, but Medina has a wall around it. If you'll remember, I don't know if I've got a picture of it. I don't see, I thought I had a picture nearby. Medina has a wall around it, so it's only exposed in the north. And so the trench enabled them to hold off the attacking forces from the north. And they won significantly. So the final battle, it wasn't really much of a battle, is Muhammad goes and from Medina to Mecca and captures Mecca. And it's a very simple strategy really, but it's a very ingenious one because well, let me just describe it. This is that, if you remember, I showed you a video some classes ago. It didn't go well because it was, I couldn't get it to work. But this is a slide from that video of a reconstruction, a computer-generated reconstruction of Mecca during the time of Muhammad. And you can see that everything is circular, and you've got entrances from the south, from the north, from the west, the east are mountains. And so what he did was have his troops divided into different regiments, and they were, well, here, let me just read it. Their tactic was to advance simultaneously from all sides, targeting a single central objective. This would lead to the dispersion of enemy forces and prevent their concentration on any one front. Another important reason for this tactic was that even if one or two of the attacking columns faced stiff resistance and became unable to break through, then the attack could continue from other flanks. This would also prevent any of the Quraysh from escaping. Muhammad emphasized on refraining from fighting unless the Quraysh attacked first. So here again, it's, even though it's offensive in that he's going to retake, or not retake, he never had it, but going to take over Mecca because it is a holy site. The Muslim army entered Mecca on Monday, and the entry was peaceful and bloodless on 3 sectors except for that of Khalid's column. The hardened anti-Muslims like Ikrimah and Sufwan gathered a band of Quraysh fighters and faced Khalid's column. The Quraysh attacked the Muslims with swords and bows, and the Muslims charged the Quraysh positions. After a short skirmish, the Quraysh gave ground after losing 12 men. So again, the strategy was if you see you're losing, you stop. Muslim losses were 2 warriors. So, in conclusion of the battles, the conquest of Mecca was the conquering of the town of Mecca by Muslims led by the Islamic prophet Muhammad in December. I said 627. 627, of course, was the Battle of Uhud. 629 or January, we don't know whether it's December or January. The conquest marked the end of the wars between the followers of Muhammad and the Quraysh tribe. Upon his return to Mecca, the shrine became the focal point, that is the Kaaba, for Muslim worship and pilgrimage. The pre-Islamic Kaaba housed the black stone and statues of pagan gods. Muhammad reportedly cleansed the Kaaba of idols upon his victorious return to Mecca, returning the shrine to the monotheism of Ibrahim, which is Abraham, of course. So let me finish with a couple of conclusions about, well, conclusions for tonight, at any rate, about Muhammad as a warrior. This is the statement. I've read it before, but it bears reading again. What objection then can be taken to Muhammad's action? Is it this, that he did not with his followers and their women and children submit to these savage tribes? To free these tribes from their bloodthirstiness was the greatest kindness, and to coerce and restrain them was a mercy. They were like a man holding in his hand a cup of poison, which when about to drink it, a friend breaks and thus saves him. If Christ had been placed in similar circumstances, it is certain that with a conquering power, he would have delivered the men, women, and children from the claws of these bloodthirsty wolves. And I read to you, if you remember, I think 3 classes ago, Abdu'l-Baha's description of the depravity of these tribes, which cannot be overemphasized. So one final point, and that is, there are other battles that Muhammad was in, to which this quote particularly applies. And that we will have to discuss more. We can discuss it some tonight if you have questions about it. But basically, the premise is this, that justice in the case of attacking someone from the Islamic point of view, a tribe that is in a state of depravity, idol worship, killing their female children, and so on, that attacking them and setting them in order and providing them with not only an ummah, a constitutional government, but also introducing them to a monotheistic religion is a merciful thing to do, not injustice, but manifest justice. Now, this is something we will discuss many times, but we begin our discussion with it tonight. So I compare it, as I already have, to the Battle of Fort Sheikh Tabarsi, when Baha'u'llah went there, and we'll talk about that more some other time, but same thing, as I said. It was, of course, totally defensive, and most of the battles of Muhammad were also defensive. But the ones that were not are the ones that trouble the Christian students of Islam. But I don't know how they can, in light of what Christianity went on to do by way of conquering a greater part of the world in supposedly in the name of spreading religion, when in fact it was in the name of conquering territory and expanding their empires. So let me stop sharing my screen, and we can now begin. Alex, if you would, if there are any questions, let me try to answer them.
Yep.